This episode is sponsored by Plonk Wine Club. If you like wine but don't like standing in a store pretending you understand tasting notes, this is for you. Plonk is a curated organic wine subscription featuring small production bottles from boutique wineries around the world. No added sugar, no unnecessary additives, just clean, thoughtfully made wines that actually over-deliver for their price. You can choose all reds, all whites, or a mixed box, and you can pick, 4 bottles, 6, or even 12 per shipment. It's basically wine discovery without the guesswork. Use code NEWMEMBER for $10 off your first order and grab it through the link in the show notes. So give Plonk wine a try, because why not? There are 7 continents on Earth, as I would hope all of us know, and 6 of them you can book a flight to with enough money, patience, and emotional stamina for TSA. And then there's Antarctica, a place so remote, so hostile, so tightly regulated that most humans will never set foot on it in their entire lives. No cities, no roads, no casual tourism, just ice, wind, darkness, and a rotating cast of scientists quietly working at the bottom of the world. And apparently, according to the internet, Nazis, aliens, secret underground cities, entrances to the hollow earth, mysterious pyramids buried beneath the ice, restricted military zones, billionaire expeditions, occult rituals, and Satan allegedly hosting board meetings with global elites. Because, of course. If there's one thing that humans are excellent at, it's looking at a massive, inaccessible frozen wasteland governed by international treaties and going, no, that's definitely hiding something. TikTok is convinced, Telegram groups are thriving, YouTube documentaries with ominous thumbnails and Gregorian chant background music are absolutely having a field day. And honestly, I get it. Because whenever governments say, don't go there, and maps look weird, and planes don't just casually fly over whenever they want, and entire mountain ranges are buried under miles of ice, people start squinting. So today we are talking about Antarctica. Not the penguins, not the glaciers, not the science fair projects. We're talking about what people think is really going on down there. Welcome back to Why Not Talk About It, the podcast where we unpack the world's most chaotic stories, mysteries, cults, conspiracies, crimes, and cultural moments, one glass at a time. I'm Ashley, and today we're heading straight to the bottom of the globe to explore one of the internet's favorite rabbit holes, Antarctica conspiracies. Because somewhere along the way, this frozen continent stopped being a dangerous place for climate scientists and became online, a mythological super zone where every major shadow government storyline apparently converges. We've got Nazi expeditions that allegedly never ended, secret underground bases, radar scans that people swear reveal ancient ruins, hollow earth entrances, ice walls protecting the edge of the world, aliens at the poles, restricted airspace, and my personal favorite, the idea that dark supernatural forces are chilling beneath the ice and summoning powerful people for secret meetings like it's the world's coldest, most exclusive corporate retreat. Make it make sense. But listen, I'm not saying that that's not what's happening, because honestly, who the hell knows? Now, we're going to briefly cover what Antarctica actually is, why it's governed the way it is, and what scientists are doing down there. Because the real star of today's episode is the conspiracy ecosystem that has grown around this place, right? Like how real history gets stretched, how blurry satellite images become quote unquote proof, and why humans absolutely cannot handle blank spots on maps. So grab a drink, get cozy, and prepare to emotionally spiral with me as we ask the most important question of all. What the hell is actually going on in Antarctica? All right, let's get into it. Before we spiral into Nazis, aliens, and underground ritual chambers, we do need a couple minutes of baseline reality so everyone's standing on the same icy page. Antarctica is massive, like massive, massive, bigger than Europe, covered almost entirely in ice that can be miles thick in some places. It has the coldest temperatures ever recorded on Earth, months-long periods of total darkness, and winds that basically feel personal. There are no cities, no permanent residents, definitely no Starbucks, just rotating groups of scientists, engineers, medical staff, pilots, and support crews living at research stations scattered along the coast and deep in the interior. And here's where people start leaning in. Antarctica isn't governed the way that other continents are. Instead of belonging to one country, it's managed through something called the Antarctic Treaty System, an international agreement that came out during the Cold War and basically said this place is for peaceful scientific research, territorial claims are frozen, like the land, and no one's allowed to militarize it. Multiple countries run research stations there. They coordinate logistics, share data, follow strict environmental rules. Mining is banned, weapons testing is banned. Certain areas are protected zones you absolutely cannot just wander into. Flights are limited, tourism routes are controlled if they even exist, and access is expensive and heavily regulated. Now, on one hand, that makes total sense. It's one of the most dangerous environments on Earth. Crevices can completely swallow vehicles. Whiteout storms can erase the whole horizon. You can freeze to death in minutes if something goes wrong. If governments didn't regulate access to this place, that would just be irresponsible. Let's be honest, the government isn't always bad. But on the other hand, you've got a continent bigger than Europe, as I said, controlled through international agreements with restricted zones, limited travel corridors, no permanent civilian population, and vast areas that nobody can just go to. They can't explore them, right? And humans hear that and go, well, isn't that interesting? Because historically, whenever powerful governments coordinate about one location, keep tight control over access, and use words like, restricted and protected, people start wondering, what else might be going on there? And not necessarily in like a definitely aliens kind of way, more in a why is this different from everywhere else on Earth kind of way. And the fact that humanity can't seem to agree on anything, but yet all the world leaders agreed to let Antarctica just chill. Pretty suspicious, if you ask me. Add in the fact that huge portions of Antarctica are still hidden beneath ice, that satellite imagery sometimes looks strange depending on lighting and resolution, and that scientists regularly drill miles down into frozen layers to study ancient climate history. Yeah, that's not suspicious at all. I mean, I guess you could say that it's extremely fertile ground for imagination, but that's the PC answer, if you ask me. And, conspiracy culture loves three things more than anything: blank spaces, international cooperation, and places you personally will never be allowed to visit. So, this quick reality check isn't here to shut anything down. It's here to explain why Antarctica becomes the perfect setting for every shadow government, ancient civilization, supernatural, off the map storyline imaginable. Because once you establish, okay, it's massive, dangerous, internationally governed, and largely inaccessible, the internet immediately says, cool, what else are they not telling us? All right, now that we've got the boring but necessary scaffolding in place, let's talk about the moment Antarctica went from, science stations and ice cores to post-war military missions, Nazi expeditions, and decades of speculation, because that's where things really start getting spicy. So, this is where Antarctica's reputation officially graduates from remote science outpost to why does this feel like the prologue to a thriller novel? Because a huge amount of modern Antarctic conspiracy culture traces back to two very real historical things. One, Nazi Germany sent an expedition to Antarctica in the late 1930s. And two, after World War II, the United States Navy launched a massive mission down there called Operation High Jump. Those two facts alone, internet gold. Let's start with the Nazis, because obviously. In 1938, Nazi Germany sent a ship called the Schwabenland to a region of Antarctica that they dubbed New Schwabenland, or New Swabia. Officially, the expedition's purpose was recon for whaling routes and potential, territorial claims, which at the time lots of countries were casually doing in Antarctica. They dropped metal markers stamped with swastikas, of course, across various sections of ice. They took aerial photographs and they mapped coastline. And that's it. That's the documented part. But online, that mission mutates into something much bigger. In conspiracy spaces, the Nazi Antarctic expedition becomes the beginning of secret bases carved into the ice, underground cities, hidden advanced technology, and escape routes for high ranking officials at the end of World War II. Some versions go further and claim Hitler didn't die in Berlin at all, that he fled through secret submarine routes and ended up living out his days beneath Antarctica in a subterranean fortress. I mean, I'd rather be dead than live in Antarctica, but is there evidence for that? No solid proof, of course. Why would there be? But what does exist is decades of post-war rumors about missing submarines, alleged German technological experiments, and the very real fact that multiple Nazi officials disappeared in the chaotic collapse of the Third Reich. When you mix genuine historical uncertainty with a frozen continent that no one can actually go check or verify anything, that narrative grows some legs. Now, enter the United States Navy. In 1946 and 47, just a year after World War II ended, the U.S. launched Operation High Jump, officially known as the United States Antarctic Development Program. And this was not a cute little research trip. This involved more than a dozen ships, thousands of personnel, aircraft carriers, submarines, recon planes, helicopters, months of operations. It was one of the largest Antarctic expeditions ever attempted. I mean, leave it to the US, you know what I mean? Go big or go home. Official goals included training troops for cold weather operations, testing equipment, mapping terrain, and establishing research bases. Again, totally reasonable in the Cold War era when, militaries were obsessed with being prepared for literally any environment. But if you're already suspicious of governments and then you hear, massive post-war military task force goes to the most remote place on Earth, you're going to be side-eyeing some shit. You know what I mean? And then we get to the man who becomes central to basically every version of this story, Admiral Richard E. Byrd. Byrd was a famous polar explorer who participated in Operation High Jump and later led additional Antarctic missions. He gave interviews after, he wrote journals, he became a magnet for interpretation. In particular, conspiracy circles love to quote statements attributed to Byrd about a new enemy capable of flying, quote, from pole to pole at incredible speeds. In mainstream historical context, those comments are usually framed as Cold War anxiety about emerging aviation technologies, so jets, long-range bombers, missiles, stuff like that. But in conspiracy retellings, that line becomes proof of advanced craft, hidden civilizations, or something non-human operating out of the polar regions. Some versions even claim Byrd secretly traveled into the hollow earth through an Antarctic opening and encountered a subterranean advanced society. Now, there are fake versions of Byrd's diary floating around online that include dramatic sci-fi level encounters, and historians pretty widely agree that those are not authentic. But the fact that real interviews exist, mixed with unverifiable documents and decades of rumor, you see how the fog rolls in. And what's interesting here isn't just whether any of this is true, it's how these stories build. You start with a documented Nazi expedition, a massive US military operation, a famous polar explorer, early Cold War secrecy, inaccessible geography. And over time, those ingredients get recombined, amplified, and mythologized into a whole cinematic universe of Antarctic lore. One person posts a scanned photo, another person stitches it with ominous music, someone adds a missing submarine, someone else adds UFOs. 20 years later, you've got forums treating it like it's established history. And honestly, Even if you don't buy the more extreme versions, it is fascinating how Antarctica becomes the perfect stage for unresolved World War II questions and Cold War paranoia to keep replaying in new forms. Because the setting does half the work. It's frozen, it's remote, heavily regulated, and most people will never verify any of it firsthand, which makes it the ultimate blank canvas for, post-war mystery. All right, now that we've got Nazis, military fleets, and alleged polar showdowns on the board, let's go even deeper, literally. Because one of the biggest reasons that Antarctica attracts so much speculation is simple. We can't actually see most of it. Roughly 98% of the continent is buried beneath ice. In some places, that ice is over 2 miles thick. There are entire mountain ranges, valleys, river systems, and lake networks sealed underneath a frozen shell that's been building for millions of years, which in itself is already unsettling. Not in a supernatural way, just in a, there is a whole ass secret world under your feet and you can't access it kind of way. Scientists figured this out using radar and seismic imaging. Basically, they bounce signals through the ice and measure what comes back, creating maps of the bedrock below. Those scans revealed things like the Gamburtsev Mountains, I think I said that right, a massive buried mountain range, roughly the size of the Alps, deep rift valleys carved long before the ice arrived, and hundreds of subglacial lakes trapped beneath pressure and darkness. If that doesn't sound bleak, I don't know what does. One of the most famous is Lake Vostok. Vostok, I don't know how to say that. But it's a body of water sealed under ice for possibly millions of years, isolated from the surface, existing in complete blackness. God, that's depressing. So, scientists drilled carefully to sample it because they wanted to study ancient microbes and climate history. The internet heard they're drilling into something that's been sealed for millions of years, and immediately we're like, okay, but what else is down there? Oh, and lest we forget about the very real and documented blood falls. These, of course, are not under the ice, but they're a bright red waterfall pouring out of a glacier. And for a long time, no one fully understood why. But scientifically, it's actually caused by iron rich water trapped beneath the ice that oxidizes when it hits the air. So basically, rust. But anyway, here's the thing when institutions announce we're drilling miles into the ice to access hidden lakes beneath a continent, that doesn't land as boring. That lands as, please document everything and then make a movie, right? Because we want to see it. And to that fact, the satellite images of Antarctica sometimes look odd, for lack of a better word. Not because anything mystical is happening, although maybe it is, who knows, but because of shadows, sun angles, resolution limits, ice melt patterns, and compression artifacts. But still. So then you've got someone who zooms in on Google Earth, sees a triangle, shaped shadow on a ridge, circles it in, red, slaps dramatic music underneath, and then suddenly you see a caption, "Pyramids discovered in Antarctica." You've probably seen this. I know I have. So images of ice formations that, at the right angle resemble stepped structures, jagged mountain peaks that look suspiciously symmetrical, dark patches beneath translucent ice that get labeled as, buried ruins. Are most of these explainable through geology, lighting, and coincidence? Yes, they are. Does that explanation stop people from staring at the screenshots and whispering, but that looks weird though, right? Absolutely not. Because symmetry is a dangerous thing. And also because how boring would that be? Humans are incredibly good at seeing patterns, even when none were intentionally created. It's the same psychological mechanism that makes faces appear in clouds or animals in rock formations. We've actually talked about this before on this show in another episode, but this has an actual name and it's called pareidolia. And when that instinct collides with a place no one can easily go, limited public imagery, extreme terrain, and governments coordinating research, your imagination is going to stretch. Dare I say, go wild. And some people take it further. In more elaborate conspiracy circles, these buried landscapes become remnants of a lost advanced civilization, pre Ice Age human structures, alien cities frozen in time, ancient power grids, sealed vaults governments already know about, of course, or even Atlantean outposts. Remember the Atlantis episode we did? Yeah. All right, now that we've got radar scans, hidden mountain ranges, sealed lakes, and alleged frozen civilizations on the table, it's time to head into the theories that abandon geology entirely and start flirting with the cosmic. Because next up, we're talking hollow Earth, alien entrances, and the idea that Antarctica isn't hiding ruins, it's hiding a doorway. One of the oldest frameworks people plug Antarctica into is the hollow Earth theory. The idea that our planet contains massive interior spaces, possibly inhabited by advanced civilizations, ancient beings, or something non human entirely. Versions of Hollow Earth go back centuries. Writers, mystics, and explorers in the 1800s speculated about polar openings at the North and South Poles, entrances into a hidden inner world. And Antarctica, being remote, icy, barely explored, and conveniently located at the bottom of the map, perfect candidate. In these narratives, the South Pole isn't just a coordinate, it's a door. Some claim Admiral Byrd discovered such an opening during his, polar flights. Others say satellite imagery hints at massive circular depressions in the ice. Some even suggest strange magnetic behavior near the poles is evidence of something structural happening beneath the crust. Now, official explanations for polar magnetism involve Earth's core, shifting magnetic fields, and physics that make most of our eyes glaze over by the third sentence. But conspiracy spaces look at that same data and go, okay, but what if that's not the whole story? Then we layer in UFO lore. Because polar regions show up a lot in speculative accounts of UFOs. This is partly because of military installations, radar systems, and extreme atmospheric conditions that can make things look strange in the sky. Some theorists believe Antarctica hosts hidden alien bases beneath the ice or underwater entrances that connect to advanced civilizations monitoring Earth. Like, what the actual hell? Others frame it as just neutral research outposts, and some frame it as something far less friendly. What fuels these stories is the same pattern we've been talking about this entire episode: restricted access, government run research stations, military logistics, long range aircraft operating in remote skies, and massive blank areas on maps. Like that combo invites big theories. And I mean, can you blame us? Seriously. Then we get to the ice wall crowd. This overlaps heavily with flat Earth communities, where Antarctica isn't a continent at all, but a gigantic ring of ice surrounding the world, basically, supposedly patrolled to prevent people from discovering what lies beyond. In that version of reality, Antarctic treaties and limited tourism routes aren't environmental policy, they're enforcement. Antarctica becomes the boundary, the edge, the place you're not meant to reach. And again, what's fascinating isn't just the claim itself, it's how Antarctica works so cleanly as a setting for it. If you were designing a mythical barrier for humanity, you would pick, the coldest place on Earth, months of darkness, lethal storms, shifting ice shelves, crevices you can't see until you're in them, and almost no civilian traffic. That is not subtle. That's a fantasy novelist's dream. And some people genuinely ask, if something world shaking were being hidden, where else would you put it? Now, here's where I want to slow down for a second. A lot of these theories don't always present themselves as, trust me, bro. They come wrapped in, maps, old expedition logs, blurry satellite images, diagrams, aviation charts, flight path screenshots, magnetic data overlays, and long forum threads where everyone builds on each other's research. It creates the feeling of crowdsourced investigation, if you will, of people piecing together something institutions supposedly missed or perhaps ignored. And that kind of collaborative energy is powerful and intoxicating, especially when the subject is a place you personally will never be able to verify for yourself. And because Antarctica has so little public everyday footage compared to cities or beaches or highways, the mystery vacuum stays wide open. One strange video circulates, one grainy clip, one, anonymous post claiming a pilot saw something impossible near the pole, and suddenly a whole mythology gets reinforced. And certainly not because everyone agrees on one explanation. They absolutely do not. But because Antarctica functions like a narrative sandbox. You can drop almost any cosmic storyline into it and it fits. Alien base, ancient subterranean civilization, polar gateway, hidden interior world, edge of the map, supernatural stronghold. The geography itself does half the storytelling. And listen, I'm not here to tell you which, if any of those are right. I am saying that when a place is this extreme, this restricted, and this visually strange, people are gonna keep filling in the gaps with the biggest possibilities they can imagine. Because small mysteries don't survive long on the internet. Only the big ones do. All right, before we go full demonic summits and Hollow Earth entrances, we need to talk about something that comes up in almost every Antarctica conspiracy thread, no matter what flavor you're in: restricted zones. Because one of the most common claims online is you're not allowed to go most places in Antarctica, as we've discussed. Flights avoid huge areas, governments patrol it, something's being protected, right? And that part is sort of true, just maybe not always in the way people mean it. Antarctica is carved up into a patchwork of, research regions, protected wildlife areas, scientific preserves, historical sites, and zones that require special permits to enter. Some locations are off limits because they're ecologically fragile. So, places where a single boot print could contaminate microbial ecosystems that have been isolated for thousands of years. I mean, that makes sense. Some areas are restricted because they contain long term experiments scientists don't want disturbed. Some are historical huts and early expedition camps that are legally preserved, like open air museums frozen in time. And some places, they're just flat out dangerous. We're talking hidden crevices or crevasses, however you want to say that, that open beneath, thin snow bridges, ice shelves that crack without warning, katabatic winds that can knock people over, whiteout storms that erase the horizon so completely you lose depth perception and can't even tell where the ground ends and the sky begins. Navigation becomes total guesswork, and rescue becomes, let's just say, complicated. So, yes, access is tightly controlled. Tourism is routed along specific coastal corridors. Private expeditions need permits. Flights stick to approved paths. No one's veering off course. And certain inland regions are basically no-go zones unless you're part of a major, well-funded scientific operation with, survival gear, logistics teams, and emergency evacuation plans. From a safety standpoint, that all tracks. From a conspiracy standpoint, however, it's catnip. Because when authorities say, this area is restricted for environmental and safety reasons, everyone else hears, what the hell are you hiding, right? And to be fair, historically, governments haven't exactly earned universal trust when it comes to transparency, especially around military operations, classified research, or remote facilities. So when you combine international treaties, limited civilian access, military, flight corridors, protected zones, and a continent you can't visit, like we've mentioned, people start wondering whether those restrictions are doing double duty: safety and secrecy. Some theorists point to satellite imagery that appears blurred or lower resolution in certain areas. Others track flight paths that curve away from the interior. Some cite cargo planes landing at research hubs and ask, what exactly is being shipped in and out? Food, fuel, drilling equipment, scientific instruments, or something else? Now, in official explanations, those flights are, quote, hauling essentials for survival and research, because everything in Antarctica has to be flown or shipped in. every drop of fuel, every lab instrument, every medical supply. But conspiracy spaces don't stop at official explanations. No, no, no. We overlay maps, compare satellite tiles, screenshot restricted airspace, build theories around why one valley is harder to access than another. And once you've accepted that Antarctica simply operates under a different rule book than the rest of the world, which it does, it becomes easy to believe that the rules themselves might be hiding layers. Not necessarily aliens, not necessarily demons, but something unusual, strategic, something the public doesn't have full visibility into. And that ambiguity is the entire point because Antarctica isn't transparent in the way cities are transparent. Can't walk through it, can't, film freely. You can't casually verify what's happening in most regions. So explanations, even reasonable ones, feel incomplete, which leaves room for conspiracies. All right. Take everything we've talked about so far. So, the secrecy, isolation, restricted zones, ancient ice, buried landscapes, military logistics, shadowy expeditions, blank spaces on the map, and now layer on top of that religion, cosmic evil, elite power structures, secret societies, ritual, apocalypse energy. And you get one of the most dramatic Antarctica theories of them all. The idea that somewhere beneath the ice, or deep within restricted regions of the continent, a dark supernatural entity resides, sometimes framed explicitly as Satan, sometimes as an ancient demonic intelligence, sometimes as a non human force older than civilization. And according to certain corners of the internet, this being doesn't just exist down there. It allegedly meets with high level political figures, celebrities, billionaires, military leaders, the world's most powerful people, to issue instructions, form pacts, and guide global events. A literal summit at the bottom of the world in the coldest place on Earth. Now, before your brain fully short circuits, let's talk about where this idea even comes from. Because this isn't one single source, it's a collage. It shows up across multiple end time communities, occult focused conspiracy forums, Telegram channels dedicated to elite cabal narratives, YouTube docuseries with ominous titles, and TikToks that start with, "They don't want you to know this." So basically, the details change depending on who's telling it. In some versions, Antarctica hides an ancient gateway to hell. In others, it's a prison, a place where a dark entity was sealed long ago beneath ice and rock. In others, elites periodically travel there to conduct rituals meant to maintain power, avert catastrophe, or receive future instructions. Sometimes it's framed as spiritual warfare, sometimes as ancient technology misunderstood as demonic, and sometimes as a non human intelligence manipulating world events. What stays consistent, though, is the setting. Antarctica is always portrayed as remote beyond imagination, inaccessible to the general public, governed by international treaties, monitored by militaries, full of restricted zones, geologically mysterious, and blank enough for anything to hide, as we've discussed. So, from a storytelling perspective, that's perfect. If you wanted to locate the most consequential secret on Earth, you'd put it somewhere no civilian could just stumble into it with a selfie stick. But the people who believe versions of this story don't usually present it as fiction. They build entire frameworks around it. They point to elites traveling internationally in private jets, secretive summits and closed door global meetings, occult symbolism in architecture or art, historical fascination with Antarctica by powerful nations, religious prophecies about end times, and ancient myths about underworlds beneath the earth. And they connect those dots, not in a sloppy way, but in a meticulous way. Long threads, annotated screenshots, maps, symbol breakdowns, timelines, people cataloging, every elite visit to polar regions and asking why. Fair, of course. People tracking military logistics flights and wondering what kind of cargo would justify those operations. people dissecting ceremonial imagery and linking it back to supposed underground chambers. Again, the argument isn't usually, trust me, bro. It's presented as pattern recognition, as investigative work, as a massive puzzle that governments and institutions don't want regular people assembling. And this is where the psychology gets really interesting, to me anyway, because theories like this don't just live in the realm of geography. They're about power, they're about whether the world is secretly being run by forces ordinary people never see. They're about whether history is driven by politics and economics or by something darker operating behind the curtain. When people talk about Antarctica in this way, they're often tapping into a much older human instinct, the idea that evil has a physical location, that hell is somewhere underground, that demonic forces live beneath the crust, that poles, that edges of the map, the places humans can't reach, are spiritually charged. Across cultures and centuries, people have imagined portals, underworlds, sealed entities, and sacred or cursed geographic locations. Antarctica just becomes the modern high-tech version of that mythic space. So, replace caves with ice sheets, replace torches with satellite imagery, replace medieval monks with online sleuths. Same impulse, different century. And listen, even if you're deeply skeptical of the literal version of this theory, I do understand why it hooks people, because when you look at it, how little of Antarctica most civilians ever see, how heavily logistics are coordinated by governments, how opaque certain research operations can feel from the outside, how much global power is concentrated in very few hands. It's not surprising at all that some minds jump to metaphysical explanations. I mean, shit, I can't explain it. And y'all know I've been going down a few of these rabbit holes, trust me. But especially in an era when institutions feel distant, elite gatherings make headlines, and the world already feels like it's operating on levels most of us never get invited to. Add religion, add symbolism, add secrecy, add a frozen continent, and you've got the ingredients for a perfect storm. And the thing is, for people who take this theory seriously, this isn't entertainment, it's existential. It reframes geopolitics, celebrity culture, wars, economics, pandemics, everything as downstream of a deeper, darker hierarchy. Antarctica becomes the nerve center, the control room, the place where human power intersects with something else. Whether you buy that or not, it is undeniably one of the most elaborate and emotionally charged narratives attached to the continent. Because this isn't just about aliens or ancient ruins. This is about who or what really runs the world. All right, take a sip. You deserve it. I deserve it. Because we've officially reached peak Antarctic mythology. And from here, the episode pivots. We've now stacked Nazis, secret post war battles, buried mountain ranges, alien bases, hollow earth entrances, ice walls, elite summits, supernatural entities, and centuries of myth making on top of the same frozen landmass. Whew, breathe. So, this raises the obvious question: why Antarctica? Why does this place specifically become the dumping ground for literally every major conspiracy genre? Because it's not random. Antarctica has a few built in features that make it uniquely perfect for this role. First, it's physically inaccessible to almost everyone. Most humans will never go there, as I've said, not because they're banned, but because it's brutally expensive, logistically complicated, and actively trying to kill you with wind. That alone gives it mystique. No casual, vacation footage, no daily vlogs from commuters, no street level Google Map walkthroughs. The less familiar a place is, the easier it is for stories to grow unchecked, but also more fun because, if we have no imagination, what are we doing here? All right, so second, it's governed differently than anywhere else on Earth, as we've talked about also. No one country owns it. So, certain things are banned there, but the kind of structure it's rare. And whenever something is rare in geopolitics, people start asking why, especially in an era where public trust in institutions is complicated, to say the least. Third, most of the continent is hidden, literally. Miles of ice cover everything: bedrock, mountains, valleys, lakes, ancient landscapes, all sealed beneath a frozen lid. So even scientists rely on radar, drilling, and indirect measurement, which is totally normal in polar research. But psychologically, that does something to us. Our brains prefer direct access. And when we can't have it, believe me, honey, imagination steps in to fill the gaps. And fourth, Antarctica already lives in a mythic space in human culture. The poles have always been symbolic. Edges of the map, places beyond civilization, white voids in old atlases, unknown regions where monsters, gods, or portals were once penciled in. Long before satellites, people imagined the Arctic and Antarctic as thresholds between worlds, between known and unknown, between human territory and something stranger. Modern conspiracy culture just updates that instinct with drones and PDFs. Then there's the algorithm, because none of these theories exist in isolation anymore. You watch one Antarctica clip, then another, then one about secret tunnels, then one about elite travel patterns, then one about magnetic anomalies. Then suddenly your For You page is acting like Antarctica is the narrative hub of the entire planet. Platforms reward escalation. The weirder, more ominous, more world shaking, the claim is, the more engagement it gets. So the stories don't just spread, they evolve, they absorb each other. Nazis merge with aliens, aliens merge with demons, demons merge with, elite cabals. Everything cross pollinates into one just giant shared myth system. And people in these communities aren't usually approaching this casually. They're building timelines, collecting screenshots, cross referencing maps, archiving deleted posts, sharing documents, comparing notes. It feels investigative and participatory, like crowdsourced truth seeking, which is incredibly compelling, especially when official information is slow, technical, or wrapped in bureaucratic language that doesn't travel well online. I don't know. I think we should never stop questioning things and doing our own research. I think that's super important. Never just say okay. Do you know what I mean? Um, but some may see it as, an echo chamber. Others may see it as a community of people doing all the footwork. There's also something very emotionally satisfying about big explanations. Conspiracy theories, especially global ones, they often offer a sense of order. And Antarctica, silent, frozen, restricted, mostly unseen, is the perfect blank stage for that story. You can't disprove much firsthand, you can't easily verify claims, and you can't just book a ticket and wander around with a camera, which honestly keeps the mystery alive forever. And even if none of those theories were circulating, Antarctica would still feel eerie. Months of darkness, total isolation, wind screaming across empty plains, everything buried in snow and ice, research stations straight up cut off from the rest of the world. If a novelist invented that setting, you'd roll your eyes and say it was too on the nose. So when the internet takes that backdrop and adds hidden civilizations, supernatural forces, and global puppet masters, it doesn't feel random. It feels scary and satisfying at the same time. Humans are creative and imaginative. Why would we just settle for the boring PC answer? I mean, come on. All right, now that we've unpacked why Antarctica becomes the ultimate conspiracy magnet, we're almost at the end game, because next comes the part where I slow down, take another sip of wine, and tell you what I actually think is going on here, what intrigues me, what makes my eyes roll, and where I land after ice skating through all of this lore. I'm just going to say it. Antarctica is suspicious as shit. It's one of the most extreme and accessible environments on Earth. It's governed by international treaties instead of a single nation. Travel is tightly regulated, logistics are military level, and huge portions of it sit under miles of ice that most humans will never see in person. That combination alone is enough to make anyone's eyes start twitching. I also think that, governments and research institutions are way more opaque about what happens than they are about, say, Chicago. Some of that is probably practical, some of it is probably bureaucratic, and some of it is probably because existing polar research logistics bores the hell out of most people. But opacity, international or not, is rocket fuel for speculation. Now, do I personally think there is a literal demonic command center under the ice issuing marching orders to global elites? I don't know. I'm not saying yes or no. I don't have proof of that. But I do understand why people go there, because this isn't really about Antarctica. It's about power, secrecy. It's about whether the world is run by visible systems or invisible ones. It's about frustration with governments, corporations, closed door meetings, billionaires moving through the world with very little, public explanation. Everyone is entitled to their privacy, but I mean, come on. And when you already feel like massive forces shape your life without your permission, the idea that something even bigger might be behind the curtain doesn't feel completely insane. And that's what conspiracies tap into. They're not just geography theories, or they're emotional theories. They're about trust, about who gets information and who doesn't. They're about whether regular people are always reacting instead of steering. So when Antarctica becomes the alleged place where those invisible systems physically converge, where elites fly in, where rituals supposedly happen, where ancient beings might be buried, where, non-human intelligence waits under the ice, that scratches a very old human itch. The idea that the world has a hidden control room. Do I think every blurry satellite image is proof of ruins? No, I don't. Do I think Cold War missions automatically equal underground cities? Not necessarily. But I am quite comfortable saying that we don't know everything about Antarctica, and that some shady shit may very well be going on there. And that's why Antarctica refuses to stop pulling people in. So now I want to know, what do you think? Because honestly, this is one of those topics where everyone has an opinion. So let me throw some questions at you. And I really want you to sit with these. DM me, comment, argue with your friends. Let's talk. All right. Which theory grabs you the most? Ancient civilizations, alien bases, hollow earth entrances, secret elite meetings, Nazi secrets, or just Cold War leftovers that spiraled into legend? Would you go to Antarctica if you had the chance? Like tomorrow, fully funded? Would you do it? Do you think humans are wired to believe that there are hidden places on Earth we haven't uncovered yet? Or do you think the internet just makes everything feel more mysterious than it really is? And lastly, be honest. After everything we just talked about, do you think Antarctica is just an extreme scientific outpost? Or do you think it's hiding something? Not necessarily demons or aliens, just something. Because I'll tell you right now, this is one of those subjects where even if you don't subscribe to any specific theory, it's very hard not to admit the vibes are immaculate. All right, guys. Well, that is it for today, but thank you so much for hanging out with me. Before you go, if you're not subscribed to the After Hours newsletter, you are missing out. Every Friday, you'll get a quick episode recap, the quote of the week, a confession from a fellow listener, my personal takeaway from the episode, and of course, the wine behind it all. Speaking of confessions, if you've got one, we want to hear it. It could be a conspiracy you low-key believe, an embarrassing story, or a hot take about literally anything. Whatever it is, we want it, so submit away. You can also pitch episode ideas. So if you've got something you want us to talk about, we are all ears. You can do all of these wonderful things by visiting our website at winenotpod.com. And if you love the show, leave us a review. It really does help more than you think. All right. Well, thank you again so much for joining me, and I will see you next week for another wild ride. Bye.